These are the waters of Tulalip. And Bernie Gobin, a fisherman, a warrior, and a man who lived between two worlds.
Well, my name is Bernie Gobin, and I was born in Darrington, Washington on December 8th, 1930.
The son of Ruth and Joe Gobin, Bernie grew up with 6 brothers and sisters on the Tulalip Reservation, 22,000 acres bordered by pristine water, forest, and today, a freeway. Tulalip is named after the Coast Salish Lushootseed word small-mouthed bay. This is where Bernie grew up, on the water. The reservation was created in 1855 with the signing of the Treaty of Point Elliott. 7 tribes and allied bands were told to move here by 1934, including the Snohomish, Snoqualmie, and Stillaguamish. Together, they formed the Tulalip Tribes. Bernie, a Snohomish, would come to learn every word of the 1855 treaty. Through the years, Bernie shared his stories, what life was like in the old times.
During them times, when the mom and dad first got married, they moved up to back of the Priest Point store. We lived way back in the woods there, just a little buggy road getting back there. And it was really nice back there, though. Had our own big garden and cows and pigs and chickens. And so we lived there, no facilities of any kind. We used to catch our water in barrels and for taking baths, because the well was way down in the bottom of a valley there. And it was a rough life. Anyhow, I decided way back then that I was going to change things for myself. I went to school in Marysville. I didn't go very long. I never did. Always, our clothes, most of our clothes and our shoes came from the commissary down there. So I always felt out of place. Cecil and Lewis and I spent our time out in the flats hunting ducks. So I got to the 7th grade and never finished it. Of course, I went in the service then. Well, in those days, there wasn't much around here to do. Fishing was very poor at best. And we didn't, if we were actually fishing because we had to live, we would have starved to death. We were fishing because we're fishing people, and that's all we knew, and that's what we enjoy doing yet today. I joined the Army because it was a go broke situation around here. Had nothing to really look forward to, so I joined the Army in 1946. And woke up in Korea about 6 months later, and what am I doing here? I'm only 15. Debated whether I should tell my superiors my age so I could get home. But I stuck it out, and it was a very good, important part of my life. Learned some responsibilities and learned more about life.
Bernie came home to Tulalip determined to make his life count. He found that with hard work, he could make a difference. He went back out on the water. He served as a tribal judge. Bernie became a board of director and tribal chairman. There was an inner fire.
In 1855, our people were not dependent on anybody for anything. All the resources were here at that time for us to survive, and actually we were known as some of the richest people in the world because we didn't need anything to survive. It was there in plenty. And then in 1855 they signed that treaty, and the next day we were totally dependent on the government. and they never did fulfill their promises to provide what they were to provide in that treaty for us. So one of the most important things was fish, and we were denied the next day after signing that treaty the right to take fish, you know, in our usual and custom areas.
The mission began. Bernie teamed up with his friend Stan Jones to give Tulalip a voice in fishing rights. The two went to work with other Indian leaders to testify in the Bolt decision. Often 5, 6 days a week, Bernie and Stan drove round trip to the court proceedings in Tacoma. Their hard work mattered. In 1974, Judge George Bolt ruled treaty tribes were entitled to 50% of the catch.
We are the Salmon people. That's what our tribe is known as. And we've always depended on the salmon resource along with all the other resources from the water out there. And, you know, pre-1974, we owned a resource that wasn't out there. It was depleted and it was gone. So we really won the battle, you might say, but in terms of what we won, you might consider we lost the war because there was no fish. So I've always been involved and interested, along with Stan. We worked as a team to try to put together a program that something would come of what we won. We'd have some resource to fish.
Bernie was instrumental in getting Tulalip involved in the Bolt decision. He quickly realized that this was a major case and that Tulalip should be involved and should formally get its rights recognized in its usual and accustomed fishing places.
Bernie and Stan knew that Puget Sound salmon runs needed to be rebuilt. They believed it was time to build a fish hatchery. During this very time, Tulalip renewed its centuries-old first salmon ceremony, a tradition held every June to honor and welcome the first returning king salmon. Elder Harriet Shelton Dover led the way.
The Indians had a very deep feeling of reverence for everything that lived.
Bernie and Stan knew they had work to do. The hatchery was needed.
And we didn't have anybody on board at that time that could help us write a proposal, so I think it was mostly Stan and I's longhand put down on paper, and we're able to convince the council that this is a program we should get involved in if we ever expected to realize anything from the Bolt decision. You know, there was no fish. We got 50% of something, but we didn't know what it was because it wasn't there. And so we put it together and had no problem.
Construction of the tribal hatchery began in 1982. Federal funds came through to build a facility which replaced a tiny hatchery consisting of 3 plastic swimming pools.
They were actually swimming pools, and they were, what would you say, 30 by 30? I mean, it was
something like that, yeah.
Big pool. And we plumbed them so that when we wanted to release them out into the bay there, we just opened a valve and they all flushed right out into the bay. And we actually had people that would come out and dip nets. They thought they were smelt different things when they'd see about the bay. Well, from when we began, we had nothing. And we invested $10,000 hard cash with the tribe, which was a lot of money for our tribe in them days, and put together the first successful program of enhancing our fish through use of neat-tart trays and hatching out eggs and holding them over for the required time. Like Chinook is, I think, a 2-year holdover period to keep them in pools or fresh water so that they imprint to the area that they're in and come back there.
It only seemed right that the now thriving hatchery be named to honor Bernie. Nisqually leader Billy Frank Jr. was among those at the dedication dinner to remind people of Bernie's hard work.
We have a treaty with the United States, and we will make them live up to it. And that's Bernie Gobin and Stan Jones's position from day one, maybe from the time they were born. And Bernie was always on the front line preaching that, preaching it.
Tribal leaders lined up to honor Bernie for his work, along with those who were with him every step of the way.
Well, basically, over there is where the first mini hatchery for the tribes was constructed. Right over on the, where you can see where the fish ladder is, just above that, on the grounds above that, we ended up using these above ground swimming pools with the bright blue liners, and also the basement of the old Bureau of Indian Affairs hospital that had once sat there. We found that just in clearing the area, and so we put that to use as a fish rearing pond for several years too. And Bernie always laughed about the fact that that was where he had his appendix out, so he'd actually had his appendix out in the middle of our fish pond.
And so Bernie was our first director of fisheries. The position was created really for him, and he didn't want to give up his position on the board. He felt, gosh, I won't have any influence on fisheries. And I said, yes, you will, Bernie. It isn't the position on the board, it's you. It's you the people are listening to in these matters. Really, the fishermen here do not understand, know, and appreciate the work that he did. There's not much fish now, but there was when Bernie was the director, and he fought tooth and nail. He and Stan, they would go out and they would argue, and they'd get into some real arguments with some of the other tribes. And, oh, it was great, hearing the tales and hear from other people, about these meetings that they're telling us about, where they really fought for the Tulalip fishermen here.
Well, Bernie, I believe, was dedicated to the community and his tribe. During the Bolt decision, him and Stan Jones were the main ones. They took the full brunt of the Bolt decision. And he was stunned there, and he took all the flack from the outside, from the United States government, state of Washington, and the fisheries. I admire his strength for standing in there and standing up for his people.
I really looked up to those two persons for the dedication because it went beyond the job that they were hired for. They dedicated their lives to being part of the Bolt decision and looking after all tribal members for the treaty rights that we actually deserved.
Well, I think a person with real high standards, and these type persons only come around once in a while, and just same like Abe Lincoln, the good president, and like that, and I think Bernie Gobin is right person at the right time, and he knew all about lobbying and how to, we had to get to the politicians and all that, and so he had that drive, and I think that was what created the whole works. You can look now from a little Neotart tray, $10,000 to what's totally been accomplished. That's so he's it had to be him, because he had that drive.
Throughout the years, Bernie had his bride, Dolores, at his side. She too was a tribal leader, rising through the ranks from clerk to executive director of the Tulalip tribes. Together, they raised 6 children. Bernie and Dolores taught their kids that their Indian culture isn't ancient history.
Well, you have to go back again to, we were like the first couple generations away from when the treaties were signed. And so all of that historical, community-based social life was taken away when the treaties were signed. There were tribes from all over the region brought here to Tulalip. Tulalip wasn't a tribe, it was a place. So it's the first reservation formed once the Treaty of Point Elliott was signed, and the BIA's presence was located here on Tulalip Bay. And if you go back and look to the historical figures, there were a big pier right down below where the school is, and that was the government pier, and it was like one of the longest piers around at that time. And so that was where the first boarding school was established, and they started taking families from homes and putting the children into the boarding schools. And so reviving those traditional practices was central to the tribe reestablishing themselves as an independent people. And so it wasn't just Dad, it was people like Stan and other members of the board of directors that wanted to see that cultural life brought back. So they started all of that with the historical knowledge housed in Harriet Dober, one of our preeminent tribal members at the time.
Fishing, we are a fishing people, and our whole life was centered around the season of fishing. When the first monarch butterfly showed up, my dad would say, "Oh, it's time to get ready to go fishing." And so then began the process of mending our nets, getting them out. And back then, there was an old road that ran in front of the Tulalip Health Clinic, and they would lay their nets out, and they would use tar, and they would tar their nets every season, and about the middle of May, and get ready to go fishing. And in the process, my mom and my grandmas and aunties, they would all prepare to load up all our goods from our house, even furniture, mattresses, and we would move to the beaches, and we'd live there from May till about October. And so we thought every family lived that way. And when we lived down there, we subsisted off of the fish we caught, the crabs we caught, shrimp, flounder, sole, and it was a wonderful way of life. And so we grew up, that was our way of life, fishing. That's who we are as Coast Salish people. And so it was natural when Dad saw that, when he became a tribal leader, that our way of life was being threatened by so many outside influences, that he would get involved in that fight.
Well, you know, Bernie's legacy to me also includes not only fishing rights, but as a leader for many years, working with our other leaders, coming together. Wherever you look, he had an influence on him and our other leaders collectively together. That everywhere I look, I think of him and what conversation was had. Today, when I think about the museum, our cultural learning center here, what discussions did Bernie and other leaders have at that time to lay the foundation so that we could accomplish that? When I think about our marina and the challenges that they faced back then, what did Bernie and Stan and Wayne Williams and others do to work together?
Well, I think the most important for our people to know that it wasn't Stan and I that did anything, it was the Tulalip tribes as a body moved ahead, and together we accomplished our goals. And I think an old elder of ours, Big Shot James, said if you take a piece of kindling, you can take and break it over your knee. But if you take a bundle of kindling and have it wrapped together, you can't begin to even break the first one. And that's what I think would be my recommendation, that they stay as a bundle, work together.
I have a lot of pride in him and my children. He has instilled in them, you know, the qualities that he has. And one of them is interested in politics, and, you know, they've all gone in their own fields. And I'm really proud of him.
Dolores and Bernie were married for 59 years. and both have left a legacy of leadership and tribal pride. The Tulalip Tribes has grown to be economically self-sufficient, founding its own city called Quilceda Village, bordering Interstate 5. Bernie died in 2009 at age 78, and Dolores followed a year later, also 78.
But it's Bernie Gobin, me, me, Bernie.
Importantly,
Dolores.
lives were touched by a man and his friends who continue to make a difference.
They had compassion and integrity for their people, and I think that's what drove them to work as hard as they did on the board and just for the people.
He was a father, he was a family man, he was a tribal leader, he played in the music bands, he carved, he spoke well, he was a great negotiator, and he was a great fighter to defend treaty rights.
He would always ask when I first started working here, how are my fish? He felt like all these fish were his fish. But, you know, they're all of Tulalip's fish. I think that kind of added to the, him instilling the importance of the fish in me by asking me that all the time and making me feel like, you know, that's my job.
I believe this is so fulfillment of all our people that we do have the salmon coming back each year in different species of them. This will be for our children's children's children long after we're gone.
That's our title, yeah. Salmon people, that's what we're called.